Good morning, good afternoon or good evening everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another instalment in the Sydney Railroad build. If you were watching last time, you will have seen me finish track laying in the main yard area, and I did make a comment about installing switch machines, but then I decided rather than do that, I want to get all the track laying finished and install switch machines in both the last two areas in one operation. So the next task is to move over to the end of the room and install the sub-roadbed for the ethanol plant and the associated yard. So without further ado, let's just head out to the workshop and get that done. I think I might have said in my previous video that I plan to get on with the switch machines in the yard area next. Well, I've had a change of plan. I've decided that I want to work on finishing the bench work for the ethanol plant. First thing I've done this morning is I've got the piece of plywood that I need positioned in the right place. By using a few scraps of wood, I've been able to get the curve template also in the right place to be able to mark where the curve has to be cut. I'll take this out of the way. I've already drawn the line. I'm just going to take that back to the workbench now, get that cut, and then I will continue from there. Although I only had a little over an hour out here this morning before I had to go out and get my errands done, I did manage to get all the risers installed and glued and clamped. So now I can remove those clamps and install the sub-roadbed over the top of them, and then I can continue either way from there. Well, this piece of sub-roadbed is now permanently screwed in place. I've also added the end piece that I needed because that offcut was too short to finish that frame. The next thing I did was add the safety fences to the top of the ramp from the lower level, because it's a lot easier to clamp it now before I put the tops in for the ethanol plant. I'm going to move round and work in this direction, and by the time I've got the next piece installed, those clamps will be ready to come off, so I can then go back to the ethanol plant area. Still plenty to get on with today. So I'm just going to turn the camera off, get back to work, and I'll talk to you again later. Well, the next 7-foot piece of sub-roadbed is all ready to go in. I have all the risers clamped in place, and also onto the next section, the next frame. From this point onwards, it's just going to be glued to the edge of the piece that's already there. And rather than work out the grade at this point, I've just put them all in at the same height. Some of them are going to be packed up because I've got to drop half an inch in that 10 feet or so. So it's hardly a significant grade. I think it's a lot easier to do it with shims than to adjust the height of all the risers as I go. When I left it yesterday, this area may have looked like it only just started, and now of course it looks like it's almost done. There really isn't a lot of difference because I've done all the hard work yesterday. This morning I just put a tapered piece in here, glued it in place. I've got some temporary screws to hold it while the glue sets. I've positioned the roadbed that I cut yesterday on top of the risers I put in. I've clamped the long level on it to keep it straight. So now all I have to do is pack up all those risers, and I know the grade is uniform. I don't care what it is, I know it's very, very shallow. It's probably less than 0.5%. I'm going to start by putting a shim in near the middle, just to stabilize it, and then I'll fill in all the others afterwards. Shouldn't take very long. Well, I've now cut the benchwork top for the next 7-foot section. Actually, it's a little less than 7 feet, it's like 81¼ inches. I've cut it full size, even though I know I'm going to have to trim it because the mainline grade drops down in front at a slightly lower level. But at the moment I think it's best to cut it full size, and then once I know exactly how wide the yard is, I can then cut it again and use the piece I cut off the front as the mainline grade. The next 3-foot section I'm going to 2-piece, because that means I can use the piece I cut off the side of that one to make this top instead of cutting a whole sheet. And then the last full sheet I have will be enough to get the corner in. In preparation for the corner section of the sub-roadbed, I've added some risers at this end where the joists were lower. If I'd been thinking further ahead, I would have got those glued in place before I went in for lunch, and that way the clamps would be able to come off by now. But not to worry, a few more minutes and I can take the clamps off anyway, as long as I'm careful not to bump them sideways and disturb the glue joints. It'll take me that long to get the next sheet of plywood cut approximately to shape. Well, there is that piece positioned accurately along the back. I have used a double stack to make sure I have plenty of clearance there, and it's more than enough. I've also drawn around the sub-roadbed for the mainline grade. So when I take the plywood back to the workbench, I can then cut it the right size to miss that. I'm going to give it about 1/8 of an inch of tolerance, and then I can get that piece installed. Well, that is all the plywood installed for the ethanol plant, including this little piece that was missing along the front there. Everything's properly screwed down all over. I've still got some more trimming to do along this end, but at the moment I don't know just how much I've got to cut off. I won't know until I have the track print spread out, and I've still got to assemble that from about 7 different strips. So I'm going to go away and get on with that, and I'll come back and talk to you again later. Well, that is all 7 sections of the track print for the ethanol plant laid out and taped together. I'm reasonably happy with the location of it. So the next step is to cut it along the back so that I can tape it securely to the benchwork so it doesn't move while I'm plotting the track. So I'm going to do that next, and then I'll work on finishing the sub-roadbed in this corner. In addition to extending the benchwork top where I told you I was going to, I've also marked out all the track locations at this end, all the way from the mainline junction around here to the start of the ethanol plant. All this track is going to get individual strips of roadbed, and from here onwards I'm going to go with a sheet covering the entire yard, or except the main line. I've run out of time for today, but the first task for tomorrow will be to fold this paper template back over the edge and to install sheets of foam roadbed. And once those are installed, I can then put the paper back and start marking out track locations on top of it. So I'm going to go in now, get Zeus fed, and I will see you again tomorrow. Well, that is the foam roadbed installed over the entire area of the ethanol plant yard. I've also started shredding the track plan, marking out everything from the front. The reason I'm starting from the front is that I decided to tape it at the back. You always have to start shredding from the opposite side that is taped. So for every track I mark the front edge of the ties, and for turnouts I mark both sides. I'm just going to quietly get on with this. It doesn't take all that long. I'm going to get all the curved track and the turnouts done at this end, and then I'm going to cut away the middle part of the plan and just do the straight part of the yard with a 5-foot straight edge. And then I will continue the shredding pattern at the far end. Well, that is the whole of the ethanol yard marked out, all the way around. I've got rid of all the paper because I've finished with that now. I've still got to lay individual strips of roadbed along this area for the main line, for the lead, and the 2 grain supply tracks. There's also a few spurs at the back that will get individual strips, because it was a lot easier to do it that way than to make these sheets 6 inches wider, which would have got in the way of where I had the track plan taped. Also, before I start laying track, I've got to cut some of the benchwork out of this area. Where the short line heads into the 2-track staging yard, I want that turnout to be accessible, so I'm going to cut back as much of the sub-roadbed as I can in this area, right back to the edge of the track, well, within about 1/2 inch of the edge of the track, and then ultimately that will be a removable piece of scenery in there. Rather than install these strips of foam rubber in this area, I've decided I want to complete the sub-road bed for the rest of the railroad. I've already done the grade for the main line in front of the yard. The only place I've still got to do is the lead track that extends beyond the ethanol yard, almost down to the start of the harbour. The reason for making that lead track so long is so that arriving trains can be doubled over in the ethanol yard, because the yard tracks here are not particularly long, and the client will most likely want to run trains that are longer than one track. Well, that is the sub-road bed for the lead track installed all the way along. I had to use 3 different methods of supporting it, depending on what the benchwork was like below it. The first section is done with a series of legs. The next bit uses longitudinal bracing. And then the last bit, where I'm already below the top of the joists, I just added blocks to the top of them to bring it up to the right height. Right, I've now installed the roadbed strips from the junction on the main line all the way around here, past the ethanol plant, across the bridge, and all the way down to the harbour yard. And I've also done the yard lead for the ethanol yard and the various spurs, well, most of the various spurs anyway. I have not yet done the spurs at the back of the ethanol yard, and the reason for that is that I may end up having to adjust the position of them when I get the turnouts in. So there's no point in putting them in now, since I might have to adjust them later. It's quite late. You can see it's dark outside, so I'm just going to go in now and I'm going to come back out tomorrow morning. Well, that's all for this episode. Hope you enjoyed the video, found it useful or interesting, or both. And I hope to see you back next week, where we will return to track laying in the ethanol plant area. So until then, thanks for watching, and bye for now.